So yesterday we learned about 4 tools used to prove triangles congruent. Spent a lot of time practicing the recognition of each type. Again, just remember that one tool is tricky. SSA is not an appropriate tool because the way to view it is if you read it backwards. It's not a word you should be writing on your papers in math class. Today we're going to learn to look at images and use common sense to add other parts. Keep in mind the best way to work with congruent shapes is to mark up the picture when you know something's congruent. So look at the following problem and determine if the triangles are congruent. If so, state the theorem that proves it. So again, in this picture, they don't give us anything, but they do tell us that AB is congruent to AC. So what you want to do is identify AB and mark it congruent. Identify AC and mark it congruent. These two are the same, so they both get 1 mark. Then it says BD is congruent to DC. So again, mark these two, which is a separate set with a different pair of lines. And now what you're looking at is, are these congruent? Well, if you use your common sense, these two triangles share one common side, which is AD, and so they are congruent by side, side, side. But again, they don't have to tell you this part because they already share this side, and it makes sense that that side would be congruent to itself. Same picture, different wording. Again, sometimes they hide information inside of keywords. Again, determine if the triangles are congruent. It says angle BDA is congruent to CDA. D is the midpoint of BC. Once again, BDA, which would be B to D to A. So that angle is congruent to CDA, which would be this part. And then they say that D is the midpoint. Well, remember that midpoint means middle of BC. So D is the middle of BC, which obviously means that if D is the middle of BC, that this would be congruent to that. So they give us 2 things and they want to know if it's congruent. And once again, you have to use your common sense here to say that this shared side, which is called the reflexive property, is congruent to itself. And of course, these are now congruent because of side angle side postulate. The trick to this portion of the lesson is just learning not to assume why the triangles are congruent. Mark up the image with what you see and then see if what you have is sufficient. Sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't. Whatever happens, just don't force it because that will cost you points. So let's look at the following problem and see if you can find the hidden information real quick also. Determine if the triangles are congruent. Once again, if so, state the theorem. It says E is the midpoint of AB. So again, E is the midpoint of AB, which means that obviously this is going to be congruent to that because E is the middle of AB. E is also the midpoint of DC, so therefore again, because it's saying E is the middle of DC, it means that this piece is congruent to that piece. But they only again gave us 2 things. What's the third thing we can look at is when we have 2 straight lines crossing each other, we have what we call vertical angles. If you remember, the vertical angles are the opposite V's that are congruent to each other. So therefore, this is congruent because of side angle side. So again, what you have to now do is take what they give you and then make sure you look to see if there's anything else that you can add based off of what you know using our experience. So let's try one more before we move on to the note guide. Again, determine if the triangles are congruent. If so, state the theorem. It says AD is congruent to CB, which means that this is congruent to that. It says E is the midpoint of AB, which means this is congruent to that. And so what most people would do right now, because E is the midpoint of AB, is they would assume that E is the midpoint of DC, which if it doesn't say it, you can't say. The only thing we can add in is this angle. And because these sides don't surround that angle, that is what you call angle side side or side side angle, which again, if you write side side angle, that is a bad word when you read it backwards. So there is no way to tell that those 2 are congruent, at least based off what's in front of us. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but right now we don't know. A lot of combination of information you'll see in these problems. Again, remember that triangles are not congruent simply because they look congruent. There must be sufficient evidence to prove it. Those 4 options, again, if you want to write those down, are the only options you have. Sometimes you're given words, other times it's marked. Again, just be sure to use what you know and make good choices, or at least don't make bad choices as you go through it. So what you should do, especially if you're at home watching this, is just pause the video for at least the one I'm working on and then see if you can figure it out and then watch it with me and make sure that you got it right. And again, if there's any questions, make sure you email them so that you can get what you need out of this. So again, on number 1, and before I start, I'm usually going to pause a little bit for you to pause the video, but number 1, looking at this picture, they give us two sets of sides, and that's it. We need a third. And again, this is the one where the two vertical angles pop up right there. We now have side angle side. Again, pausing for you. On number 2, they give us two things, two sides, two angles. Again, these two vertical angles. This is not angle side angle because it's not a side in between the two angles, so it's on the outside. This is angle angle side in terms of what you're looking at. Number 3, once again, pausing for you. They give you two sides, two angles, and again, this vertical angle here, this is angle side angle, because if you look at these two angles, the side is in between them. If you look at these two angles, the side is not between them, it's on the outside of them. So that's the difference between AAS and ASA. Number 4, once again, pausing for you. In this picture, they share a side. It would be side, side, side. So again, just kind of keep in mind that's where you're going with all this stuff. Number 5, they share a side. The problem is the angle is not between the two sides, and so therefore this is called side side angle, which again, if you read that backwards, they're not congruent. 6, they both share a congruent side. Two angles, the side's not between them. AAS is okay. Now the reason AAS is okay actually is because if you have two angles in a triangle that are congruent, that means you also have the third angle that's congruent, which means you actually have an angle side angle. You just don't have to use it. So again, angle angle side means you can use it because we know that if two angles match, then the third angle has to match, and so therefore it's the ASA. But again, that's why AAS works. SSA doesn't work because you still only have one angle and you don't know the relationship between the other two. Number 7, pausing for you. They share a congruent side. The side is in between the two angles. That is your ASA. Number 8. They share a congruent side. The sides create the angle. That's why it's side angle side. And number 9. They share a congruent side. Those sides do not create the angle, so this would be side side angle with angle on the outside. But again, that reading backwards is not a word you should be writing. So it means that they are not congruent to each other. All right. So outside of that, just make sure you, again, ask any questions you have about what's going on, and we'll see what happens from there. Have a good day.